Chapterspooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapterspooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. I'm your podcast host, Matthew A.J. Anderson, a horror author, narratologist, word nerd, and nightmare critic. And today we are looking at the next book in the FunFax Horror series. Oh, and to make sure we're all on the same page, I believe some people watch these out of order, so just so everyone's aware, this season we are looking at Chapterspooks books with gimmicks, and the gimmick of FunFax Horror is that every single page is perforated and hole punched so that kids can tear them out of the book and add them to a specialized FunFax ring binder. And whilst I personally find this both literally and conceptually terrible, I have heard that a lot of kids do enjoy it. And it doesn't really affect the books that much, so let's get into the actual story. In FunFax Horror number 2, the book is titled Dream Painter by Paul Kersley. I did a little bit of looking up, and Paul Kersley seems to have written maybe one other book, but I can't even remember the title, and it doesn't matter that much anyway, because I don't want to talk too much about that. What I want to talk about is, I started this because I do like Chapterspooks books. I really do enjoy them. I think that they matter. I think that they have great potential. And it's not only the kind of thing I like to read, it's the kind of thing that I like to write. I do love horror stories aimed at kids who are still learning about the world and what is and isn't worth being afraid of. So, when I say that I hated this book, I need you to know that I was not going into this wanting to rant and rave and hate on this. I really prefer when I can find one of these books, one of these hidden gems, and show you why it's awesome, show you why it's worth reading. But this book let me down at every turn, and I was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt. Every opportunity I was like, no, maybe it will get better, maybe this means more than I think it will, maybe this is building to something greater. And every time I gave it the benefit of the doubt, I was just giving it a little bit more slack in the rope, and it used that rope to tighten the noose. This book is one of the worst books I've read in a while. I don't think it's worse than some of the other books I've read, but this book fails on many levels. So to explain why I hate this book so much, we're going to have to break the spine on this one. So let's crack open and have a look at FunFax Horror number 2, Dream Painter by Paul Kersley. So chapter 1, we are introduced to our main character, Twig. And yes, that is the only name we're given for him. I don't know his real name, we're just given the name Twig. And Twig is breaking into the carnival, like sneaking through the fence, to get to a particular shed where he's meeting his friends who are called Budge and Spike. And apparently they're some sort of a gang. In fact, whilst they're there, they say, oh yeah, we need to find some sort of a cool name for our gang. And so at first I was like, okay, maybe that's just what their gang names are? That's a thing, isn't it? I don't know, I've never been in a gang. But okay, maybe that's why they're named like this. But no, because we'll later find out there are other names of characters that are similar even though they're not in gangs. But also, I don't understand why they're in this shed, because apparently the carnival is in town, and it's a traveling carnival, so it comes and goes, but there's a fence around it, and they're breaking into it to get into this particular shed, but I don't know why they're getting into this shed, even though it's apparent that this is like their hangout spot. Okay, weird. But then we go to chapter 2, but in chapter 2, we get a perspective shift, and we are immediately introduced to our villain. So the villain of this is named Osmomzo. He's having a bad dream about how he was a clown, but people were laughing at him. But I think it's that they were laughing at him, not with him, because they were laughing at the fact that he was bad at his job. And so he hates kids. That seems to be his main goal in this book. The reason why he's doing what he's doing is because he wants other people to suffer like he did. Okay, don't ask me why he chooses the method he chooses, but that's the idea, is that he has just decided to make other people feel bad because he's not good at his job. And then we get to the next chapter, and now the gang is going to the carnival. They don't exactly explain why, especially because they seem to go and then they come in through the front gate, even though they break in to get into their shed, so Why would you go through the front gate? Doesn't that mean you have to pay for another ticket? Anyway, it doesn't matter. What matters is that as they're there, they encounter another kid called Crab. We're not told whether he used to be a part of the gang, or maybe he's part of another gang, but what we are told is that they don't like him. He's some sort of a minor antagonist, and so to avoid Crab, they join a queue of people, and whilst Twig is very skinny, I mean, that's why he's called Twig, although that would make me wonder why Spike is called Spike, if he seems to be stronger than Twig. Doesn't matter. What matters is that because Budge is called Budge because he's really big, our guy Twig feels safe around Budge, and so they're standing in this queue, and as they do, he sees the main love interest of this book. This is a girl called Silk, and no, she's not part of a gang or anything, so I don't know why she's called Silk, but I was going to give this book props when I first met Silk, because not only do we see her as the main love interest, but she's also introduced as a character. She gets a perspective in a later chapter, and she is a Native American girl who is in a wheelchair. Now, I've said before that I think that we need to have more diversity in books, and so I do like it when we have disability representation and Native American representation, but this book lost all of the points I was thinking about giving it because the way it represents Native American culture is so bad, I think it borders on potentially hateful. But you know what? We'll get to that when we get to that. What matters is that our main guy does have a crush on this girl, Silk. When he sees her, he kind of likes her, and apparently Spike makes fun of him for it. But Budge stands up for Twig because, hey, he likes a cute girl. There's nothing wrong with that. But Silk seems to be saying to him, don't go in this, because he's in this queue. And it's only later, after he's following the queue further down, that we realize that he's joined the queue for a face-painting caravan. I was going to say face-painting tent, but no, it's in this caravan. And she's trying to say, no, don't go. But she just stares and watches him, shaking her head. I will get into later why this is really, really stupid, but the most important thing here is that this is our guy going down the dark path because Osmomzo, our evil villain, his evil plan is to torture people using evil face paint. Now, I have said before, and I will definitely say again, that a stupid idea does not make a bad story. I'd argue, some of the books that I've read for this podcast, I'd argue that a story about a holiday cabin that's secretly a UFO, or a story about a Thanksgiving turkey that comes back to life, these are incredibly stupid ideas, but they make great stories. So, evil face paint, in and of itself, is not a stupid idea. But this story squanders all of the potential it could have with face painting. And to explain why, let me just show you the next chapter. So our kids, they go to the caravan, and trust me when I say I'm not going to skip anything from when they go to the caravan, because apparently they have no memory of actually getting their faces painted. It's just gone from their memory, some sort of weird amnesia. They wander into this caravan, and they come out with their faces painted. So this is from the book. Chapter 5. Happy Faces, Happy Dreams. All was stretched into slow motion for Twig. It was a long, low corridor from the rear of the caravan to the dwindling daylight at the other end. Budge and Spike were waiting. 2 painted faces, 2 great big smiles. His face must be the same because he saw them pointing at him. They bobbed with laughter. Twig smiled, and the drying paint made that smile stick. Then he laughed. Laughter, howling by and bouncing from behind, came after him. He ran. He could fly. Twig launched himself at the other 2, making them spill and tumble into the fresh air, the laughter roaring out over them. In bursts of giggles between gulps of air, they subsided on the grass, trying to untangle themselves. "Osmomzo's brilliant," Spike hollered as Twig worked out that elbow wedged behind his ear was not his own. "Let's see what we look like." Twig was the first to stand. He paid no heed to the stares of onlookers, thinning out aimlessly as the day ended and moonlight came. Pink, painted smiles stood grinning at each other. It was difficult for Twig to recognize his friends, even with Spike's yellow hair sticking up and Budge's flat face beneath his baseball cap. "Do I look different as well?" Twig wished he had a mirror. "Don't matter," Budge guffawed and slapped the other 2 on the back. And it did not matter. Nothing was important. Nothing except laughing. And that laughter hung in the air around them like bubbles, bright and shiny. "Hey!" Spike exclaimed. "I can catch my own laughter!" He gleefully jumped in the air. "It's great!" "What's happening?" Twig shrieked in fun. "These bubbles, our laughing, is this real?" Twig didn't really care, leaping up to grab the same empty space in the air as Spike. "Hey, that's mine!" Spike whooped. "What are we doing?" Twig heard his own voice, but did not really know if he was speaking. "Spike, does my voice sound different?" His words echoed inside his head. "Hello!" he shouted to test himself. "Hello!" It rang in his ears. "My face is numb," Budge moaned, making a game of walloping himself. "Is it the faces?" Twig asked, "making this happen?" The whole thing was strange, weird, but no one seemed to care. "I said it don't matter," Budge bellowed a laugh. He reached up high and over to grab a handful of air. "Nothing matters anymore," Spike agreed. "We can do anything we like." Twig wasn't sure who had shouted, "Who cares?" Okay, so taking evil face paint into some kind of a drug metaphor, and like I said, I saw this could have potential. This sounded interesting, some sort of interesting metaphor for drugs. After all, dreams are kind of like natural hallucinations, and in a sense that's kind of drug-like. I get it, but there is one issue, and you see it a little bit here, but it shows up again and again in this book, is that this isn't the scary kind of hallucination or dream, even. I mean, we've been having dreams since as soon as we became humanity, basically. Even other animals dream. We have so many tropes about sleep paralysis, about nightmares, night terrors. We have so many common tropes in our dreams of teeth falling out, or falling, or feeling like we're running but being unable to move our legs as though in quicksand while something is chasing us. There are all of these ideas of things in dreams that are scary, but this book doesn't really use any of them. Now, I know in this very first scene, I think we're trying to establish the fact that this is some hallucinogenic type drug by showing them the happy, laughy type dream, but it doesn't really expand on that much, especially because in this chapter, after they're done laughing around, they run into Crab again. Is this meant to be a scary moment? But no, it's not a scary moment because they all feel so happy and carefree that they actually fight him off a lot easier. In fact, Budge and Spike grab some guy lines off the circus tent, which, side note, shouldn't do that. Those things are there to create tension. The thing will fall down. But anyway, they grab the guy lines and they dance around Crab like he's a maypole, tying him up. And he can't get out of this tight binding that they wrapped him in with the guy lines. And he's like, "Oh, get back, you," whatever nonsense. And they're just laughing and giggling. And then we go to the next chapter and Twig is in bed. So, not really scary. I mean, it does hint at the idea that he's not really in control, but that's not really a scary dream to me. But more importantly, to me, more important than any of this, as I said earlier, all the characters have weird names. Twig, Budge, Spike, Crab, Silk, and we'll later meet a character called Woodsmoke, although that's its own issue. They have all these strange names, and in the very first chapter they go into some cabin, and then they leave, and then they come back to the circus, and then they fall asleep, and then he's in bed, and we're also drifting back and forth between Osmomzo's perspective and Silk's perspective and their perspective. And so one of the main issues that I had with this book, and why I hated it so much, is that it felt surreal the entire time. The whole book feels surreal, and so there's no real contrast between the moments when we are wafting between going to the cabin for some reason with characters of names that aren't real, and then a moment when they have their faces painted and they're giggling and say that things feel surreal, but it doesn't actually feel any different. The vibe and the tone is the exact same, and so it didn't feel any different. I didn't really see why it was significant that they had their faces painted or not. So the only really scary moment we get is that as the kids are playing around and they've tied up Crab, he then gets a vision of a shadow, a toad-like shadow, which he also says that he doesn't quite remember Osmomzo, so it's implied that this is Osmomzo. In fact, it suits his description. He's said to be quite bald and quite fat, and so he gets a shadowy vision, and then he wakes up in his own bed, and he feels a little dehydrated, and he's got dried paint on his face and rubbing off on his pillow, and all he says is, "Oh, I've got to get back. I've got to get my face painted." And get ready for that to happen a lot, because he will meet up with his friends and they'll say the same thing. Got to get our faces painted, got to get our faces painted. And if this is going for an allegory of drugs, I do kind of like that it feels silly like that, because that is kind of what it's like with drugs. It's kind of a silly thing to be so focused on something so small, so simple. But my issue is that it still doesn't feel scary. In fact, here, let's read the next chapter, sort of exploring this addiction where we actually see the characters. Here's how it represents it. Chapter 6. The Call of Osmomzo Cannot Be Denied. The night air was electric at the street corner. Clear of the houses, Twig could see the whole park with the fair fully installed. It floated in the darkness, a bizarre ocean liner with lights ablaze. The beat of the disco sounds from the rides clashed horribly with the traditional organ tunes. The chaos of music spread out through the park gates to wind around the streets. Following a Pied Piper's call, the crowds came. They barged past Twig, leaving him feeling as if he did not exist. So rude. He did not really want to join them. But he had to have his face painted again. So, hands in pockets, he paced into the park and onto a black strip of grass. It was a no-man's land, where the lights of the streets never touched and the fairground lights could not reach. Then he was walking on stars when he finally trod on the splatters shining from the rides. Engrossed, he was within the fairground before he knew it, surrounded by the whiz of noise and bustle. The circus tent stood like a landed UFO in the center. He avoided it without knowing why. It held something for him, a dreadful memory of a past dead or the premonition of something to come. If he was asked, he could never explain. He just avoided it. Walking past candy floss clouds and stuffed toys clutched in arms, he made his way to Osmomzo's caravan. A magnet, it drew him away from the fun to a dark corner. There was no warning. Twig's brain leapt forward a step. A string of events happened rapidly, leaving no time to react until it all passed. Silk whooshed in front of him. She stopped quickly, almost flying headlong out of her chair. "Do not go in," she said firmly, without ceremony. "What?" Twig slurred, reeling. Silk was there. She was there, close, and she was talking to him. "Don't." Her eyes were wide. "Don't go into Osmomzo's van. The dust of the dead will..." "Hey, Twig!" Someone bounced into him. "Let's go before a queue builds up." It was Spike. He was leading him away by the arm. "Wait!" Twig dug in his heels. Silk had spoken to him, so simply, and he thought it would involve cunning schemes in the playground before he could ever have a chance to speak to each other. What was she telling him, though? "Dust of the dead?" he murmured. "Come on, Twig!" Spike was dragging him away. Silk pleaded with her eyes. Twig started to reply, but could only stare down at her face, half hidden by her long hair, her legs in a blanket, her hands delicately holding the wheels of her chair. And those eyes. "Twig!" Spike insisted. "Come on!" "Let go!" Twig shook free. "Stop bossing me. I'm always being bossed." Twig stood rocking, unsteady on his feet. He wanted to speak to Silk. It was his chance. His heart began to pound. His throat dried. Silk was gliding nearer with scarcely any effort. Words could not form for Twig. A great shape appeared out of the background. "Hey, Budge!" Twig heard Spike's greeting. Budge just walked by. A zombie, ignoring everyone. "What's wrong, Budge?" Spike whined. "Need to get my face painted," Budge replied flatly. "Come on!" Spike grabbed Twig again. "Catch up with Budge!" Twig still could not speak. A whisper formed inside his head, a silent call no ear could ever hear. He was being summoned, called by something dark and powerful, which he knew was in the caravan. "Need to get my face painted." Was Budge responding to that same call? "Don't." Silk's words shimmered and disappeared. In a dream, he let himself be pulled away. Silk became smaller as the distance between them grew. Perhaps she would eventually fade into nothing. Now someone else was beside her. He came from the shadows, as if it was shadows from which he was made. "Who?" Twig hooted. With scraggy hair, a scarecrow in an overcoat moved into the light, closer to Silk. "Who?" Dazed, he turned and followed Spike and Budge up the steps. Once more, Twig went into Osmomzo's caravan. Okay, a couple of things. First things first, this scene is basically identical to the last scene. I mean, yes, she's speaking to him a lot more. She's saying a lot more than just don't and shaking her head. But this is the same as the last scene. She comes up, says don't do it, he does it, wishes he could speak to her more, gets his face painted. So we're just repeating stuff now, okay. And yeah, he does get to see the character who will be revealed as Woodsmoke. This is Silk's grandfather. And we know that because he was in the earlier chapter when she was talking to him. But nothing has progressed. I mean, yes, we know it's addictive, but we knew that as soon as he was saying, need to get my face painted. So that was kind of obvious. And this book will repeat it a couple more times before anything even happens. So, what are we doing here, people? What are we doing? What benefit are we gaining here? And as you can see, some of the writing here, this is him sober, face not painted, and he's talking about the way that the Carnival looks like a ship on the ocean that's drifting with the lights, and the no man's land where the light doesn't meet, and the idea of people pushing past rudely but treating him like he's not even there. You see what I mean? How it has this sort of surreality through all of the writing, and so the tone doesn't shift when he is dreaming or has this painted face hallucinogenic dreaming thing happening. Doesn't make any sense. So because the book is repeating itself, I'm going to avoid repeating myself, and I'm going to talk about some other stuff that bothers me. A couple of things. First of all, you can't see it, but this book, every single full stop is followed by 2 spaces. Now, this is a personal quibble of mine, because I don't think that looks nice. When you have 2 spaces after a full stop, it means that just by glancing at the page, it looks like Swiss cheese. It looks like it's full of holes, because the space is only meant to be 1 space wide. When there's 2 spaces, it looks like the sentences are detached from each other, so it just doesn't look nice. Another thing that really annoys me is that this book has chapter titles. That alone does not bother me. Chapter titles can sometimes establish the tone, but all of the chapter titles here, they seem to be taken from some quote from the book or some line of dialogue or narration, but more importantly, every single chapter title ends with an ellipsis. For those of you who don't know, an ellipsis is that ... that sort of trailing off thing. But this is the issue. This book seems to treat it like trailing off, which again seems sort of dreamlike. Oh, it's trailing off, what could it be? But more importantly, it makes no sense to me to have the chapter titles end with trailing off, because the trailing off, it's not just a pause. When people do the trailing off thing with an ellipsis, it's not meant to just denote that someone has stopped talking. I just stopped talking there. That doesn't require an ellipsis, because an ellipsis represents specifically an omission. That is when you were going to say something, but then you don't. So a good example of this is, I left my husband. He wasn't a good man. So that kind of a pause, the ... the reason that there is an ellipsis in a sentence like that is because you're leaving out everything that made him a bad man, or you're leaving out the fact that the character was stopping to a moment to reflect on that history with this person. So an ellipsis is saying that something was omitted. We left something out here. Something could have filled in that moment, that thought, that space, but it was left out deliberately. Which doesn't make any sense for a chapter title, because you're literally about to explain everything in the chapter that follows. So it's really annoying that every single chapter title ends with an ellipsis, because we're about to find out what was omitted. It's in the chapter. And I could understand if it started and ended with an ellipsis, because that's something that people sometimes do with quotes, because some of the stuff in here are quotes from dialogue or from the narration, and so having an ellipsis at the start and the end would explain what is actually happening here. This is coming as a direct quote, but they don't do it at the start and the end, they only do it at the end, which makes it feel like every single chapter is going, something's going to happen. I'm like, I know something's going to happen. This is literally the first words of the chapter. You don't need to prepare me for that. But okay, I admit some of that is just me being a word nerd and obsessing about the grammar, so here's something that's actually more relevant to the book. Never do they explain what the kids' faces look like, except in one scene later, one character specifically has a face, but it's even commented on that because it's a bright red, it's different from everything else. He points it out because it's so different, and so we don't know what their faces look like. They say it's green at one point, but they earlier said in the previous chapter that they had pink smiles, and so green, maybe, pink smiles, maybe. What? And to me, this bothers me so much because I feel like there's a lot of potential here. Because think about it, face painting for kids, right? An obvious one is the clown face, because our main villain is a clown, and I think he does use that later on. But I don't know if he's painting clown faces on them, even though they say they have painted smiles. But honestly, think about it. When you go to the face painting tent, you see all the kids getting their faces painted. They'll get like butterflies, and they'll get tigers, and they'll sometimes get witch faces. They'll get big fangs, or they'll do scales like they're a crocodile. You can do all kinds of interesting faces, and to me, there's a lot of potential there for playing around with, maybe if they're having dreams, maybe it's dreams of being these things, maybe it feels like they have these powers. They don't necessarily even have to have them. They don't necessarily have to have the ability to run like a tiger or fly like a butterfly, but that to me would explain, okay, dream painter, you're painting on the faces and they're getting those dreams. That would make a little bit more sense. But this doesn't explore any of that. It's just they get their faces painted and it must be like drugs, I guess, because that's how they act. We don't know what their faces look like, but it's like drugs. But it also helps them fight people off, because Osmonzo will use it for that later, but also we saw them literally use it to tie up someone dancing around like a maypole. They defeated someone using the drugs, so are they a good thing or a bad thing? Is the withdrawal the bad thing? What is going on here, people? But okay, so they get their faces painted. I think this time we do see that there's purple curtains in the caravan. That's the only thing we learn. That's the only real benefit, I guess, to having this drawn out so much, is that every time they go, they see a little bit more of the caravan. Now they see the purple curtains. Next time they'll see the guy with the bald head, and the next time they'll see that he's actually dipping his fingers into the paint pots. So they drug out and they dance around. I think they say they see Crab at some point, but it doesn't matter because, yeah, they dance around and he feels a little bit numb, he gets tired, and then he's in bed again. Oh no, I'm in bed. I've got paint rubbing off my pillow. I need to get my face painted again. So we're going to get this a few more times. But we do get a scene in between. So as he's going back again to get his face painted, he gets intercepted by Silk, and we do have a little scene here, and we're getting piecemeal a bit more of the lore and stuff behind this story. You know what? I am getting real sick of how slow this book is, so I'm just going to cheat and I'm going to reveal all this stuff to you. So she's telling him piecemeal and all this stuff, but it turns out the dream dust that Osmomzo was using to control people with his evil face paint belongs to Silk's grandfather called Woodsmoke. Apparently he used to work at the circus. Osmomzo saw this and decided to steal his dream dust, which is what they call it, for his face paint so he could use it to give people bad dreams and take control of them. But that doesn't make any sense. So, okay, they do actually say in an earlier scene that this is the dust of our ancestors, but it's obviously not like cremated remains. It's not cremains because it's said to be ochre colored, but also I was thinking maybe it is literally drugs. After all, that is something that some medicine men would use, and so I did a little bit of research, and the closest thing I could find is maybe it's meant to be like mescaline or peyote. You use the original traditional peyote, and that could be in the form of a dust. I don't think it's ochre colored, but more importantly, I did a little bit of research on that, and turns out a lot of people have tried to take a lot of drugs in a lot of different ways, and it's been confirmed that mescaline and peyote cannot be taken dermally. It does not absorb through the skin. You need to smoke it or to eat it or some just. I don't know. I'm not a. I don't take those kinds of drugs. But the point is, no, this is not real. This is not a thing. I don't even know. I tried to find if maybe there was some history of Native American people mixing drugs into their war paint, but that doesn't seem to be a thing, because what is the point? It doesn't absorb, and so... But anyway, this is the thing. It's all mixing up these concepts into some big mush, rather than actually understanding the culture. This is what I call cultural objectification. It is treating it like a prop just to build up the story, even though this story does not deserve to be built up, because what are we even doing here? Some sort of weird drug metaphor thing, but he keeps getting drawn back, but he has to find the power, and it's also bad, but not. I want to take a moment to show you what I mean when I say that this book feels surreal. Because remember what I said earlier, is that this feels so wrong with the tone. It all feels surreal even when it's not. And so I want you to remember, this is a scene after he has had that withdrawal. He wants to go back and get his face painted again. He runs into Silk, she tells him not to, and he's wandering around. And so he is currently sober, and this is how the book is written. I wonder, Osmomzo licked his thick lips, are they in my power yet? He bent his torso down so that he could use a key on a chain around his neck to open a drawer beneath the tabletop. He groped inside for an earthenware jar. I wonder. Into each mixed pot of paint, he sprinkled just a pinch of ochre dust from the jar. Twig crept into the wooded walkway. Tossed about by the strengthening wind, the trees rustled excitedly. They were whispering about him, passing the message along from tree to tree. Heavy clouds roamed the strip of sky above the track. A dark storm was coming. Osmomzo used the stem of a paintbrush to stir and stir each pot of paint. It slurped. Bad dreams are coming, he drooled. The trees were closing in, becoming dense. A crisscross of heavy boughs formed a tunnel, with shadows turning stronger as the storm approached. Head moving, searching side to side with each step, Twig paced further up the track. Osmomzo stopped, stirring, and lined up the jars of dribbled colours, watching his shadows spread as his hand passed over the last one. The colour was black. Twig felt his back crawl. Something was behind him. He felt it, seeing it in his mind. A creeping presence, a shadowy hand reaching out to grasp his shoulder. He turned. Nothing. Trees began to creak as branches rubbed. The wind was increasing. He walked again, moving further up the track into the woods. Who? He whipped about, convinced he was being followed. Standing still, Twig could see the arched entrance through which he came. Finding Silk was not so important now. But something was there again, still there, behind him. It was behind him, no matter which way he turned. Shaking, almost bursting with a swallowed scream, he used all his willpower to stand still, not allowing himself to turn endlessly, not allowing himself to be bullied by whatever was behind him. It was black. He knew it was black, and it was coming closer. And he was standing there, letting it happen. "No," he screamed, denying what he was feeling. "You are not here!" He heard his shout die in the trees. "You are not here!" But still he could not help but lash out, turning and backing away with no direction until he jammed himself against a tree trunk. He clung into the coarse bark. It was real. Whimpering like a puppy, he prepared himself to let go and run, sizing up the distance to the arched entrance, which meant escape. Could he make it? "I will wait for the night." Osmumzo had finished. He treasured the jar of dust before returning it to the drawer, and grunted with effort of bending so that the key on the chain would reach the lock. Switching off the light, he left his cubicle and the paint pots standing in darkness. Fear retreated as quickly as light being turned off. Twig felt a sense of relief, tinged with shame at how he behaved when nothing was really there. "I just imagined it," he convinced himself. So, I get what they're going for here. It's like that tense moment in a movie where the evil power is lurking and doing its thing, and we're seeing the influence upon the person. But we don't actually see that Osmumzo is using any power. All he's doing is mixing paint. And it's shown that he needs to paint the faces in order for it to work. If he didn't, then they wouldn't have to keep going back to him. And so it doesn't make any sense to me that he's being followed by this shadow, even though that's not what the bad guy is doing. And this isn't all meant to be entirely real, by the way. He is not influenced by the paint, and so he's currently sober, he's currently being chased by something, and there may be some hint that maybe, just maybe, this is Crab? But the book never establishes that. It just seems to think that this is some influence of Osmumzo, which is happening, and we're flicking back and forth. But to me, this just makes it feel surreal. It feels like it's dreamy, even though he's not currently being affected by the dream paint. But okay, so we'll skip forward a little bit. Well, I say skip, we'll tell you what happens. So he does eventually go and get his face painted again, and the next time he sees Silk, she says, don't do it. Every time it's weakening grandfather. But as I said, this book is very repetitive, so we're just going to skip over some of the repetitive stuff. But most importantly, we do get a scene with Silk, where she's talking to her grandfather, and the main crux of that scene is just her saying that her grandfather is getting weaker every time that Osmumzo uses the dream dust, because even though it's supposedly something to do with ancestors, it's specifically this ancestor, her grandfather. This is like his soul dust. Okay? But yes, the kid will get his face painted, and the next time he is out, he's deciding not to get his face painted. Oh wow, finally he's deciding not to get his face painted. Maybe this evil stuff is evil. Funny that. And he bumps into Silk and she says, "My grandfather will call on you tonight." So okay, he's going to finally meet this Woodsmoke character and learn more about him, even though he just thinks he's some scarecrow. But we do get a scene which is potentially important, where Spike is talking to Osmumzo. They're actually talking with one another, and he's saying, "I will paint your face again if you get your friends to come and get their faces painted." Even though I don't understand why he specifically needs these kids to get their faces painted. I mean, actually, we will learn a potential reason in the next scene, but we will get to that, trust me. But also in that scene, we learn that Osmumzo is working with Crab. Yes, that semi-antagonistic character who's only appeared twice and doesn't really seem to matter all that much. But apparently he's using him as sort of like some bogeyman that he's sending after them. Because, I mean, dreams are dreams, my dude, but you need to have a physical thing to stop people, which becomes a whole other kettle of fish. But again, like I said, we will get to it. The next scene is going to be explosive with all of these we will get to it moments. But what matters is that Silk also says to Twig, "It's getting to the time when my grandfather needs to meet you. So tonight, grandfather will come for you." And I do believe there's a little moment when our kid is out in the streets, and I think he gets attacked by that shadowy thing, which may or may not be Crab, I don't know. But what matters is that he is unconscious, and he sees the face of what he calls the Scarecrow, obviously it's Silk's grandfather, as he loses consciousness. And so then when he awakens, he finds himself in their wooden house, which it said that because it's all stained with wood smoke, that it sort of looks like a sepia photograph. Again, surreal imagery, whatever. But anyway, most important part of this scene is that we finally get our exposition dump. This is the exposition dump of all exposition dumps, because it's halfway through the book and we finally learn what the hell is going on. So, welcome to the exposition dump. This is what it says in the book. I collapsed, Twig panicked. I was chased. How did I get here? How? Silk's raised hands calmed him. Grandfather carried you here, she told him. And you slept so peacefully. Twig nodded and admitted. I did sleep peacefully, but I dreamt... He stiffened, then relaxed. I dreamt I was on a mountain in a desert. Sand was slipping through my fingers. An eagle Ah! The old man interrupted with a raised finger. He is the one. He is the one to help us. He dreams of my death place. What? The sand slipping away? The old man's voice was thin. It is my time running out. What? It is all right, Silk reassured Twig. Here, drink some broth and we shall explain. The delicious smell overflowed from the mug Silk was handing down. He was ravenous. You should phone your parents, Silk said. Twig nodded between sips, burning his lip. My mum, yes. Then we shall talk, Silk said. There is so much to explain, the old man added. Yes, Silk said loudly, and I shall explain while you rest, grandfather. She slewed her chair to face the old man. You have done too much this night, she scolded. Rest, grandfather, or I shall call you Scarecrow. Silk giggled to Twig. You kept saying that in your sleep, and we could not understand, but I see now what you mean. Scarecrow, it suits my grandfather, but so does Woodsmoke. Woodsmoke, yes. I followed it, but... He fought off the panic, but he was still puzzled by the night's memory. But I was chased in the dark. I saw you, and that smoke, I followed it. I can smell it now. Shh, Silk soothed. Nothing can reach you here. He calmed down. But why is everything stained brown? The old Indian slumbered. His breath was shallow. Was he really dying? Twig knew never to ask. But Twig whispered to Silk, careful not to wake him. Was he really a chief? I can never tell, Silk shrugged. The way Grandfather answers questions, it is not easy to really understand. I know, Twig nodded. It took many repeated answers for him to understand all he had been told about the dust. There was so much to understand, so much still to know. Ghosts and dreams swirled in his head. He shuddered and pulled his thoughts down to earth. He wondered about Silk's parents, but did not ask. So are you a Wide-eyed, Twig leaned closer to Silk, who sat alongside him on the rug. She just laughed and also leaned closer. His bare arm just brushed hers. That touch created a strange sensation. Shivering through his body, it was almost painful, but so pleasant. From the corner of his eye, he spied on her to detect any sign to see if she was feeling the same. He could not help but look over her body, focusing on her legs. In jeans, they were laid out in a curve. He remembered the difficulty the old Indian had in helping Silk from her chair and onto the rug. Silk was watching him and followed his gaze, and she too looked down at her legs. She sighed. Oh, hearing that sigh, it dawned on Twig what was happening. He was caught. I'm sorry. Staring at you, how did it happen? Were you born? Twig's words stuttered to a halt. I could walk in the air. She was looking straight at him. In the air? What? I could walk in the air. Silk swung her gaze upwards to the high roof, and Twig did the same. I could fly. Her singing words carried him high into the shadows of the roof and back in time. I was going to be a circus queen. She was proud. I could walk in the air across a thin strand of wire. Grandfather taught me. I learned so quickly. It was osmumzo. The dream dust. Osmumzo? Twig interrupted, trying to comprehend too much too quickly. He stole the dust one night, Silk continued, and we did not know. He seemed kind. We did not know what he was really like. He tricked me into his caravan. I had my face painted for fun. And that night, she sighed, I dreamed I was an angel. An angel? Twig was entranced. I could fly, Silk carried on. Then I woke. I had sleepwalked. I was alone in the circus tent, higher than I had ever been before. I was so alarmed I slipped and fell. And now, She ran her hands over her legs. Oh, Twig was in shock. Oh. He just spoke of his confusion. So it was Amomzo who did it to you, and yet you helped me. We cannot undo this wrong. She waved toward dead legs. But we must stop Osmomzo from doing further harm. It is our duty, grandfather and I. But, Twig blurted, if he did this to you, what will he do to me? And there could be many others like me, and Budge, and why have you never tried before? I mean, to steal the dust back, and... He paused, realizing what he was saying. I'm sorry, being selfish, You were just confused, Silk reassured him. Your story, Twig said quietly. It upset me. I wasn't blaming you. Shh. Silk touched his arm. But we have to steal the dust back. Twig was inflamed. Steal? A steady voice intruded. How can you steal what does not belong to someone? Oh, Silk was upset. Grandfather, I did not know you were awake. Were you listening to me? I only heard what I already know. But the dust, he explained to Twig. We have not yet tried to retrieve it. Osmomzo is cunning and would be expecting us. There is much to lose if we fail only once. I see. Twig felt stupid. It is not wise, the old man continued. It is folly to attempt something that you know will fail. We cannot try until we know the time has come. We need a sign. Ooh, okay, we have to talk about all of this. Okay, first things first, not a Native American thing, so that's really frustrating, the way that they're representing this Native American idea of it being some ancient animal soul dust thing. It's not a thing, so, put that aside, first of all. Second of all, referring to your main love interest with a gendered Native American slur? Not cool, my dude. Not cool. Then, add on top of all of this, just how stupid this plot is. So, let me lay this all out for you. Let me lay this out for you, because we've had the kid, he's gone to this face painting tent, and they said, don't go into the face painting tent. And then he went in anyway, and he got the drugs, and these people have been influenced, he's came back, and he's been having these nightmares, and then he goes back, and he comes out with the nightmares, and he goes back, and he comes out with the nightmares, and this whole time they're like, oh, we need to stop him from doing the thing, we need to wait for a sign. But guess what's going to happen in the next scene? How do they get the dust back? He breaks into the caravan, and he steals it. Does he use magic? No. Does he use dreams? No. Does he use any kind of special skill that only he has and nobody else, not even some ancient American Indian warrior can use? Absolutely not. He just goes in and he steals it, whilst Osmomzo is asleep. And so this whole story about how, we need to be, he's cunning and so we need to wait for a sign, makes no sense. Why not? Why not? At the very third chapter of this book, had they gone up to him and said, hey, don't go in there, that face paint has drugs in it. And hey, why didn't they even go to the person who runs the carnival and say, hey, you need to get rid of this guy with the face paint, it has drugs in it. We shouldn't be giving this to people. And hey, then, story over. No drama. We don't need any of this stuff. And I recognize that, yes, that ruins all of the fun. But here's the thing, it's not fun. This is not a fun story. It makes no sense. There's no reason why they couldn't have stolen this years ago. There's no reason they needed to wait until this grandfather character was half losing his soul, whatever that even means. But why were they waiting for him to become so weak that he will die in a later chapter because he's waited so long? Why do they need to wait to have a white boy save these two Native Americans? They literally say that they waited for a sign for a person who could save them, and because he had some dream of an eagle at some point, they say, oh, then you're the one who must save us. So this, once again, is the mighty-whitey trope of how these native people, they don't understand enough about their culture, they need some white man to save them. This is disgusting. Disgusting. Because this entire plot revolves around this concept that these Native American people, because of woo-woo reasons, can't do the logical, smart thing of go get the thing back that you own because mystical dream prophecy reasons. Ooh, all of these things that don't exist because this person just made them up for this story. It is ridiculous to use these real peoples as a prop to hold up your stupid story because the plot doesn't make any damn sense. Because again, I need to reiterate this because it's so important. This magic is just in your head. It just affects your head. It's not physical. It doesn't mean you're stronger. It doesn't mean you have all these other abilities. It just means that in your head you feel like you can do stuff, and it leads to people hurting themselves, so it's not even all that powerful, and yet they're treating it like, oh, he has this wizard with like, no, it's just dust he's putting in paint that he's putting on people's faces. Go get it. It's yours. And then this story, like, there's some potential here with the idea of a character who was harmed by this guy. Okay, cool, I get that. But why is that not the main threat of this story? Because that is a genuine issue if this is actually some allegory for drugs, which I have been rapidly deciding it is not. But if this were some allegory for drugs, that's one of the hugest issues, that because you are intoxicated, because you are under the influence, you can do dangerous, stupid things. Why has that not been a thing that's happened? Why has it not been that, I mean, these kids, we show later on that Spike is actually really good at fighting. Why not, when he puts on this stuff, he becomes aggressive and he fights his friends, and because they're numb and they're happy, they're like, haha, so fun, and they wake up the next day with a broken jaw because they didn't know what they were doing. Why have they not been breaking their arms? Why have they not been hurting each other like this? Why have other people not been hurting themselves from the other people who were going to this face painting tent and getting affected by this dream dust? Why is this not the story? Why has it been entirely the whole time them going, oh, happy, lucky, giggle, playing with bubbles, and then suddenly they're like, oh, we need to stop him because he's evil? This is not a scary story. This is not a good story. This is not a good plot. These are not good characters. And this tone is so off that at this point, I just wanted to get it over with. I forced myself to take this book with me out in public just so that whilst I was waiting in waiting rooms, it forced me to read it because I just did not want this book in my life anymore. I needed to get it done. And so for your own sake, we're going to be skipping through some of what happens next because it is so annoying. So, as I said, he's going to go and steal this stuff from Osmumzo, and all he's going to use is tin snips, basically. He doesn't use any magic, any special abilities. But before he goes, he gets a dream of himself being beaten to death by Spike. And what's annoying is that, even though this is a dream, we don't learn that until after he wakes up, because it's just shown that he dies, and then he wakes up and he's not dead. He says, oh, I had a dream of dying. And Grandfather Woodsmoke says, oh, well, don't tell Silk. He basically, as soon as Silk is awake, he's like, oh, well, I'm glad that you dreamed of nothing. So he's keeping it a secret from Silk. Okay, that's a thing. But then our guy goes to this cabin where Spike is waiting for him, and so he goes into the dark cabin in the Carnival, and because it's dark inside, Spike attacks him. And I thought when he attacked him that this was because he's been waiting in the dark, so his eyes have adjusted to the dark. Obviously, that's why he can fight so well. But no, he says it's because he's had his face painted, and as we see, he has his face painted entirely red, I guess making him more aggressive, even though, as I said earlier, it would be really cool if all the different face painting meant something different, but no, we never established this before. But what matters is that as he's being attacked, our kid decides to submit at first, because he knows that he could get killed by Spike. It literally happened in his dream. So he submits, and he says, no, I will agree, I will go get my face painted. And Spike's all like, yeah, okay, that's good. And then Budge appears, and he has just grey on his face, and it's implied that he's like zombie-like. It's just like, I need to get my face painted, even though his face is painted. And Twig uses this opportunity because Budge has been on his side before. He helped him with Silk, and he's a good guy. So he says, Budge, I need your help. We need to stop. And Spike is saying, like, no, you need to stop. You know, we're going to get our faces painted. But he seems to convince Budge, and Budge just charges him and throws him to the ground. And Twig joins in and helps, like, hold Spike down. And no matter what, I guess his face paint does, it doesn't stop him from getting budged on the ground by a huge big guy. So even though Budge stops after a while because of his face paint, I guess, Twig then says, look, you need to tell me where Osmumzo is keeping the dust. And Spike says, no. And then we get a hard cut. The chapter ends. And the next chapter is called, I Made Him Tell Me, or something to that effect. And I will talk about this more at the end, but it's heavily implied that he beat the crap out of Spike until he told him where the key was. Which seems excessive because it's really just hanging around his neck. And maybe that is necessary because you wouldn't necessarily know that that's the key to the thing, but he's in a caravan, for goodness sake. There's not many places it could be. But what matters is that the next chapter we show that he just goes towards the caravan with Silk, and he then has to go in alone, and Osmumzo is sleeping, and so he sneaks up to him with some tin snips, snips the key off the necklace chain, uses it to unlock, and he grabs the dust. But as he opens the drawer, he wakes up Osmumzo, and so he starts chasing after them. So yeah, we get a bit of an intense scene where he's chasing after them, But I honestly don't see why that's so intense, because Osmumzo is very firmly established to be a toad-like fat guy, and Twig is called Twig, so he's obviously a pretty skinny guy. So I don't think he would ever catch up, but despite this, we need a scene where Silk uses her Native American magic to make animal spirits fly at Osmumzo to stop him. Okay. And so then they escape. But the story's not over, because of course it's not over. I'm not that lucky. No, what happens then is that even though they've got the dust and they bring it back to Grandfather, apparently he's dying anyway, okay, cool. But then Osmumzo still has access to the paints that he pre-mixed. They have the raw ingredient, but he has the ingredient mixed into the paints that he can still use. And so he uses it to paint his own face, like a clown, because of course he does. And then Silk and Twig go back to the circus into the Big Top. And hey, remember that earlier scene how he said, oh, I was avoiding the Big Top for some reason, some forewarning. Hey, that's foreshadowing. Not really, because this book doesn't make any sense, but whatever. They go into the Big Top. And it's completely dark, but someone shines a light down, and Osmumzo flips into view, and he's juggling battens, like those pins, the juggling pins. And he's all hee-hee, evil, jumpy, fun times. Okay. And then he throws them at them, and our kid manages to dodge. And he starts juggling knives, and he throws them, and our kid manages to dodge. And he's jumping and flipping around all the place, you know, from spotlight to spotlight, which, side note, again, established, not really much magic, except I guess for the weird spirit magic that Silk used earlier, but he doesn't have this magic. And so how is he making the spotlights work? Is Spike or Crab up on the roof turning on the spotlights? And this is an important plot point, because Silk disappears to go turn on the lights and comes back. So it's not like they're at the light bit of this thing, but obviously the fact that it's dark in there and using spotlights means that this is an advantage for Osmumzo. For some reason, our kid decides to climb up the trapeze wire to escape from Osmumzo. And there's a weird scene how Silk explains, because, you know, she was in the circus, how to climb up the ladder, because it's not that easy. You need to put tension on it. You know, vaguely interesting, but less interesting because he just climbs up, and then Osmumzo is sort of taunting him, and then our kid is up the ladder, and I think there's a scene where Osmumzo is on the thing taunting him and, like, cutting at the rope so he can't climb down easily. But then Osmumzo is on the ground, picking up things to taunt him with, and then Silk comes back, you know, the lights are on. She picks up one of the juggling pins that Osmumzo was using, and she cracks Osmumzo in the head with it, and he collapses. So, we needed dream magic and animal spirits and waiting for the prophecy of powerful white man to be fulfilled so that we could break into his caravan, use a key to unlock a drawer, and hit him in the head with a heavy thing. What is this book? And even worse, it's still not done. You'd think it'd be done because it's the second time this book is ended, but no, it's not over, because then Silk decides, even though it's incredibly dangerous, as we will see, in order to save Twig, who is up on top of this trapeze thing, she climbs up herself and she swings on the trapeze swing. You know that railing, the bar that they swing off. But because she doesn't have legs that work, she swings and just says, "Here, grab my waist." And so Twig does, and then she says, "Oh wait, you're actually very heavy." And so after swinging once, she gets him to drop down, and then she slips and falls, and Twig can't save her because he doesn't have the balance and ability she has, so he closes his eyes only to see that she is not fallen to the ground. He doesn't hear the thump. Instead, she is hanging for dear life, white-knuckled onto the wire because she fell and she needs to pull herself up, and so he thankfully can step back as she deftly lifts herself up onto the platform, sitting beside him, and then she shows him how to climb down the This is a whole lot of busy work, because what happens is when they finally get to the ground, we learn, hey, Osmumzo hasn't been knocked out, even though don't know how that works, because he's up again now, and he is threatening them with the knives, you know, the juggling knives he was using before, and he cuts at the ropes, even though they're on the ground now. And then, because he's flailing around like an idiot, he cuts the guy lines. You know those same guy lines, how in an earlier scene, the fact that they were loose and used to tie someone up didn't matter, even though I said it should. But he cuts the guy lines, and now they fall, and Silk says, "Oh no, that's so heavy, that could crush a person to death." And so then our guy runs out of the tent to save himself, just as it collapses, and Osmumzo's laughter is cut short. This book still isn't over, by the way. Still isn't over. Don't ask me why. It just refuses to end. Because next what happens is that our guy goes home to sleep, and when he goes to bed, he is then attacked by Crab, because he's still apparently a character that matters, even though I could not possibly care less. But he's a guy, and he's in his dreams, and he's strangling him, and he's killing him, but then he lets go, and he lets him catch up to his breath, and they start strangling him again, because he's torturing him in his dreams to constantly be dying. But as this is happening, whilst Silk is crying by her grandfather's deathbed, because yes, he was dying, remember, this is apparently an important plot point that we need to kill off the Native American character. And so he dies, and in his dreams, he is a rainbow warrior with a bow and arrow, and he shoots an arrow at Crab, killing him in the dream. I don't know if he was real or not, but he's dead. And then the book ends with Silk saying that she has to leave with her grandfather, even though he's dead. So, you know, it doesn't matter. The book's finally over. We're done. Goodbye. The end. Do you see why I hate this book so much? I think this is racist, but not because the person who wrote it was hateful. I just think they were ignorant of how bad this was. This was so bad. The way that it represents Native Americans as being too stupid to save themselves from their own situation, even though all it took was to take back the stuff that you own. They literally say in the book, it's not stealing, it belongs to us, and then whacking them over the head with a regular pin. That was it. That's all it took. Didn't require magic. And then they waited until the grandfather was dying to do this, even though the only reason that was even necessary to save him from Crab is because they let him do this stuff with the face painting in the first place. But there was potential here. Like, I think the drug allegory could have gone places. Like, this story could have been more interesting if they actually used real face painting and used that as the basis for people's dreams. I do like that idea of making people painted like a tiger and then feeling like a predator in the night. I like the idea of them painting themselves like a butterfly and feeling like they can fly. I even like the idea of painting them like a clown and making them feel like they've got that clown spirit so that they can use that to protect themselves. There's even potential there of doing face painting with like Native American war paint, but I think that that's leaning even deeper into the whole problematic cultural objectification, so we could veer far away from that. But these characters weren't characters. They didn't even have names. They just had nicknames. They didn't have purposes. And this story didn't make any sense. Why do they have some cabin inside of the carnival that they have to break into, and then they're making a gang, even though they don't have a name for their gang? Are they actually a gang? What? Why is this kid the main character? What is special about him? He literally says later on in the book that he felt like he didn't know what to do. He felt like he didn't have a choice, and now he was choosing for himself. But that's not really a trait that I would consider great for a protagonist, someone who doesn't know what the hell they're doing. So this doesn't seem to have any meaning in there, and whatever drug allegory here is lost, because as shown, the main character and the villain and all these people, and even the magical, mystical Indian man who's just there for exposition, uses the dust as his soul spirit, so it doesn't make much sense that it's both good and bad, and also from him. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You know what, the only things I can say positive about this book are the stuff that's peripheral. Like, I did like the fact that the main love interest was a girl in a wheelchair, because that is an unfortunate thing that happens, that people treat people in a wheelchair as though they are inhuman, as though they don't deserve to be seen as human, and therefore they aren't loved and treated like other friends and family members and potential love interests. And another thing I liked about this book, and this is actually something in all of the FunFax Horror books, but I feel like I should mention it now, because I don't know when else I'm going to mention it, is that these books are somewhat illustrated. And whilst I hated the fact that this whole book felt surreal, these are all illustrated by Joanna Roberts. She was the one who illustrated the last book, and she seems to do this charcoal-style scratchy drawing, which has a very emotional feel to it. It does feel, sometimes it feels aggressive, sometimes it feels wafty, sometimes it feels like it's in motion. And whilst, like I said, I hated the fact that this was surreal, they did suit the surreality of the story, that we had these scratchy images of that crab kid bound up in wires. We had pictures of Osmomzo when he was the clown, and the fact that it has this sort of sketchy, scratchy, vaguely smoky look to all of the images really suits. And I didn't mention the other book because I didn't find that it helped that story so much, but I guess it stood out so much more here because it was the best part of the book. The pictures. Because at least that wasn't as boring and repetitive and stupid as what was going on between those words. So that's a positive thing. And honestly, that's it. Those two may be points, but everything else I really did not enjoy. So I think it's kind of obvious that when it comes to this book, this is a D-. The only reason it is not an F is because, like I said, it did some nice pictures in there, and this did have some potential with the concepts. And most importantly, whilst I do think this is ignorant and disgusting, I don't think it was actively, overtly hateful. I think it was more covertly ignorant of Native American realities and the kinds of things that have happened to these people, and the fact that these words are slurs that we should not be putting in writing in books for kids to read. So, because I feel like they didn't realize that they were being so very wrong, that's enough to give it a quarter of a point, and all the everything else that bumps it up to D- is just because it's not necessarily a bad plot point, and I do think that some of the stuff with my hatred of the surreal vibes might be more personal, but yeah, this plot was terrible, so D-. So what can you learn from this book? First thing, totally obvious. When it comes to horror, tone is everything. The tone, the vibes, the emotion, the feeling. Because horror is all about trying to make people scared. And you can do that with plot, you can do that with character, you can have scary moments. But that tends to be a moment. A thing that happens in a moment and then it's gone. And so in order to make a book scary throughout, you need to lean on that tone and those vibes. You need to be leaning into those possibly paranoid, creepy, unsettling feelings. I do think that dreams can be scary, but this was leaning so hard on the surreal, whoopsie-doopsie, hippy-dippy thing that it didn't feel scary. It just felt meaningless. It felt like it was just wishy-washy. So you need to lean into that tone because that's what makes a book scary. But I think I could potentially have forgiven some of the issues in this book's plot if the tone had been better. Personally, because I'm more of a plot-driven guy, I'm more of a theme guy, I don't think I would ever enjoy this book, even if you changed the way it was written. But you would still give it a better chance of people enjoying the book if it wasn't written in this surreal, wishy-washy way, if it was more clear, this is what happens, A, B, C, and then yes, when they are experiencing these moments, you can make it feel surreal, but lean not on the idea that it feels dreamy, lean on the fact that it feels like a nightmare, it feels like they're out of control, it feels like they can't stop themselves, and that also then leads into the idea that when they are coming down from it, they feel empty, they feel like they're in pain, they feel like something is missing. That's what it's like to have a chemical addiction, because literally there's a chemical in you that you need from that drug that your body is craving. And so you can lean into that. This book just has them constantly repeat, need to get my face painted, need to get my face painted. That is the wrong tone if you are going for this dreamy drug allegory. Assuming it was even doing that, I just think it was trying to make face painting scary and failing miserably. The second thing you could potentially learn from this book is a little bit odd because this is leaning a little bit into philosophy, but I think that it's relevant here. So there's actually concepts in epistemology, which is a philosophy all about understanding truth. And that is the difference between explanation and justification. The difference being that an explanation will establish the facts of what has occurred, whereas a justification provides the rationale behind the facts. It explains the motivation, it explains the actual circumstances that resulted in what occurred. And the reason I'm thinking of this is because this book has a lot of explanations, a lot of exposition all about the things that happen in this book. Why does the evil face paint do the evil face paint stuff? Oh, it's because it has dream dust in it. So why don't the Native American people, why don't they just go up and they stop the guy? Oh, because it's not the right time. Why is this stuff so dangerous and controlling when all it seems to do is make people hallucinate? Oh, it's because Osmonzo is evil. Now, in each of these cases, these are explanations. They do explain what is happening. But they don't justify it. They don't explain why. They don't explain why these things have led to this result, and so it means that you're just asking more questions, or most importantly, and this is what matters when it comes to epistemology, because epistemology, when it comes to morality, you need to understand someone's justification in order to accept their moral principles, and explanation is not enough. And so in this story, in order to empathize with what is occurring in this plot, you need to justify what is happening in the story. Give a reason that someone else can look at and then accept in themselves, or even empathize with it. Even if it's not something they accept themselves, they could sympathize and say, okay, I may not be evil like that Osmonzo guy, but I get why he's doing what he's doing. This book fails at justifying any of the events in it to the point that I feel like this is an entirely pointless story. I do not recommend anyone read this book, or in fact any book that gets below a D+. I don't necessarily recommend that anyone read those, but the point is that in this book, the main reason is because it cannot justify its own existence. It cannot justify why the characters act the way they do, why the plot occurs the way it does. And so in your own stories, when looking at your plot, this may be more difficult if you're more of a pantser. I am definitely a plotter, an architectural writer, not a gardener, so I like looking at the whole thing before I get started, looking at the whole structure. And in that stage, I can look at the structure of a story and see very clearly, because there's no writing, there's no poetry, there's no prose, it's just the concepts in a template. And from that, you can very quickly see if it justifies its own existence. Because you can see if the action that occurs in chapter 1 to lead to chapter 3, does that make perfect sense? Can another person look at that and say, oh, okay, it makes sense that he'd do that because he's angry with her for stealing his father for whatever. You know, it doesn't matter, this is just an example, but that's the point, is that it's very easy as an architectural writer to be able to look at something and say, okay, that makes sense. But my point is that when writing a story, you need to be able to justify the events of that story for the reader, not just explain it, because an explanation is not enough. How many times have people seen stories where they make fun of the ridiculous explanations? My favorite one that comes to mind, and I'm not even that much of a gamer, but I will always remember how people make fun of the Metal Gear Solid franchise for saying, oh, why does that do that? Nanomachines. Because yeah, that's an explanation, yeah sure. Doesn't justify anything, because that's not exactly how those things work, but okay. That's an explanation after all. And so this is my point, is that if you don't bother to put in justifications for the events of your plot when they are not intuitive, then not only will people not accept it, they can outright reject it. And that is what happened with me in this story, and that is what will happen to you if you do not justify your inexplicable, unintuitive aspects of your story to your reader. So, unfortunately, that was Dream Painter by Paul Kersley. I will say, one thing that I found a bit frustrating is that I didn't really care about Paul, so I decided, hey, I want to know more about this illustrator, so I was looking up more about Joanna Roberts, and it seems like it's very difficult to find information, although that could just be because I'm using the wrong tools. I know a little bit about looking up different authors, you know, usually they're on Wikipedia, or you can find about them on Goodreads. Sometimes their Amazon will have a bio, sometimes they'll have their own personal website. That's really useful if you want to learn more about an author. I've used that a lot before, but I couldn't really find much about Joanna Roberts. The only thing I found to a reference to her and where she worked was linking to a website that said that I didn't have permission to see it, which seems a bit unfortunate for her. I just wanted to learn more about this illustrator and see what else she's done besides the FunFax Horror books, but I couldn't find anything. I found a couple of art pieces that looked like they were done with charcoal, but they didn't look like they were done in her same smoky style, so I don't think they were hers. And so, hey, if anyone out there knows how to learn more about this illustrator, then please get in touch with me, chapterspooks@gmail.com, because I have some of the tools to learn more about writers. I don't have the tools to learn more about visual artists and illustrators. And that feels unfair, because whilst this isn't my favorite kind of art style, it is very good. So I would love to learn more about her if I could. And, of course, share that information with everyone else. And unlike some of the other books I've read for this, I am going blind into most of these, so I had a little glance at the next book in this series, and from what I can see, it looks like it's leaning into some stuff to do with religion, and that could be an interesting story to look at. I don't know much about it yet, but hey, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.